As a Catholic and as someone who really cherishes my faith, I don't know that we can negotiate with the left in the way that needs to happen for the polarization to end. I think that it's a matter of winning.
I think you're probably right. I think one side or the other is going to win.
The man you just heard on that tape, Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito, has become one of the most strident political voices on the country's highest court. And before this latest court session is over, there are still a number of key decisions with far-reaching implications that Justice Alito will weigh in on, from abortion to guns to President Trump's absurd immunity claim. And joining me now is Barbara McQuade, a former U.S. attorney, professor at the University of Michigan Law School, and an MSNBC legal analyst. And Melissa Murray, NYU professor and MSNBC legal analyst. I want to let you both react to that, but I want to start with you, Melissa, and also react to it and also imagine for a moment what the reaction would be if the justice that you clerked for, Sonia Sotomayor, had said something similar on the other side.
Well, so first of all, I thought Lauren did a great job getting this footage. It was alarming, but certainly not surprising. I think anyone who's been reading Justice Alito's writings would not be surprised by some of the things that he has said. I think what was surprising was that he felt so free to be clear about his desire to return the country to a state of Christian nationalism, if you will, and his sense that his moral view of the universe is the one that should hold sway. And, your question is certainly a rhetorical one, a provocative one to some degree, but we all know that if Justice Sotomayor was overheard saying things like this in a recorded conversation, there would be calls for her impeachment from the bench. And those calls would likely be from both sides of the aisle. And that's what's missing today. We have plenty of Democrats saying that this is alarming and wrong, but we have no Republicans with the courage to stand up and say that this puts the court in a really terrible light.
Right. And Barb, it feels like Alito is unconstrained at this point. He doesn't care who knows that he wants to make the country into a Christian nationalist, ethno state or whatever it is he thinks that he would create under this Handmaid's Tale vision. He doesn't care if people know that he takes lavish vacations. He and Roberts don't care. And the right doesn't care. They care more about Ketanji Brown Jackson getting Beyonce tickets than they do about Clarence Thomas getting $4 million in lucre. They don't care. And so what does it mean for us that we know Alito is essentially a Fox host on the court?
Well, I think it's one of the reasons that the court finds itself in the state it's in today, when public opinion of the court is at an all-time low. In the research for my book, Attack from Within, one of the things I looked into was healthy democracies and unhealthy democracies. And one of the hallmarks of a healthy democracy is something that's referred to as mutual tolerance and forbearance. And some of what that means is that you respect your political rivals. You respect the idea that other Americans have views that are different from yours, and that you forbear from using power just because you can. Let's not forget that all these cases that come before the court are cases they select. So it's not a coincidence that they are deciding cases that address abortion or religious liberty or guns. These are cases the justices are choosing to decide. If they wanted to exercise forbearance, they could simply allow precedent to stand. And that overreach, I think, is what is causing so much problems with the public confidence in the court today.
Right. And Melissa, I mean, just in reading through the litany of things that Alito has said in the past, he's criticized the Warren Court. That's the court that gave us all of the sort of the civil rights that women, people of color, immigrants, everything, that the disabled, all of that came in the 20th century. You've now had Clarence Thomas question whether Brown v. Board went too far. This just tells me they're going to take a case to overturn Brown v. Board. So what should we be expecting? We know we have decisions coming Thursday and Friday. My assumption is they make mifepristone illegal and they give Trump absolute immunity. That's just my guess, because now Alito is telling us that's the plan.
Well, let's put some money on it, Joy. I actually don't think the court is going to find that the FDA's regulation of mifepristone was improper. I think they're going to punt that case on standing ground for lack of jurisdiction. But at oral argument, we heard Justices Thomas and Alito both inviting new litigants to bring a better case before the court, a case with better litigants who are more clearly able to show an actual constitutional injury and therefore have jurisdiction. So they're waiting for a better case because they know this case is probably not the one. But there's still also the question of Moyle versus United States. That's a case involving EMTALA, the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, and whether or not that act, which requires hospitals receiving federal funds, which is a lot of hospitals that take Medicare and Medicaid, whether they are required to provide stabilizing care to all patients, even if that care requires an abortion and if it conflicts with state law. And in this case, it conflicts with an Idaho state law. I think that's where we're going to see Justice Alito's moral vision of the universe really come into sway. And there are a lot of other cases. I don't know if the court is likely to take a case that would overrule Brown versus Board of Education or even Obergefell versus Hodges, the case that granted gay marriage. But that doesn't mean that this court can't incrementally expand the Overton window of what is possible and what is not possible in the short time that it has here. And so I think we're seeing that already. This court is moving steadily to the right. And even when it punts something on jurisdiction, it's still doing a lot of work to push this court in a rightward direction and push this country in a rightward direction. And we have to keep our eyes on all of the balls.
And push this country in a rightward direction against the will of the majority of the people in this country. Barb, we now face a situation where I have to say on the television that the former president of the United States and an aspirant to be president again met with his parole officer today. What does that mean for our republic, and what does that normally entail for a felon like him?
This is a routine interview that occurs after every conviction, whether it is by guilty plea or conviction after a jury trial. And this is where a probation officer, who is an employee of the court, works for the judge, will ask a series of questions and prepare a report to the judge with recommendations. And don't be fooled by the name probation officer, because it doesn't mean that they are necessarily recommending probation. But they will ask a number of questions that they will then go verify about employment history, substance abuse, addiction, problems in childhood, problems in schooling, good things and bad things about the character of the offender. And all of that will end up in a very detailed report that the judge will have when he decides to impose sentence, so that he has at his fingertips every detail about Donald Trump's life.
Well, I hope that the probation officer doesn't read Mary Trump's book, because she might put an ankle bracelet on him on the spot. Barbara McQuade and Melissa Murray, thank you both very much.